Imagine you're playing an FPS and you're surrounded by enemies. You're in cover, they're in cover. One of them screams, "Reloading!" As a professional gaming expert, your brain does exactly what it was trained to do. One enemy can't shoot back, that's a weakness you think. You peek out, line up the shot, ready to punish the mistake. But the next thing you see is 3 different barrels already aimed directly at your face.
Game over.
How did this happen? Were the enemies actually communicating in real time? Did they realize the teammate was vulnerable and coordinate cover fire? Was that reloading shout actually a trap to bait you into the open? Or are you being lied to by a hidden evil mastermind? Despite what it feels like, many of gaming's most legendary AIs aren't actually smart. They don't understand tactics, they don't coordinate plans. The truth is, they're quite literally incapable of thought. Like with many topics in game dev, the secret to good enemy AI is the illusion of complexity rather than actual complexity. And once you understand the trick, you'll start seeing it everywhere. When people talk about smartest AI in gaming, they always talk about fear. Even 20 years later, players still talk about those encounters like they were fighting a highly trained SWAT team. But the mastermind behind it is a logic system called GOAP, Goal-Oriented Action Planning. To understand why GOAP is special, we have to look at the naive approach first. Most of us start building AI the same way. The flowchart. In the industry we call this finite state machine. If player is visible, then shoot. If health is low, then find health pack. It's simple, but it's also brittle. In a flowchart you have to manually hardcode every single transition. If you want your enemy to be able to jump through a window to escape a grenade, you have to draw a line from every single state to a new window jump state. The more complex your game gets, the more your code starts to look like a bowl of spaghetti. And the moment something unexpected happens, the AI breaks. GOAP works differently. Instead of a rigid flowchart, you give the AI a toolkit of actions and a goal. You don't tell it how to get there, you just tell it how there looks like. The AI starts with a goal. For example, I want to eliminate the player. Then it works backwards. It looks at its toolbox of actions, for example, moving, flanking, throwing a grenade, etc. Also it builds its own path to that goal. On their own, these actions are basic, but when they're chained together is where the true magic happens. The AI starts feeling reactive and dynamic. So how do we handle teamwork anyway? For example, the flanking or the way they pin you down. They don't tell each other, I'll go left, you go right, rush B, or cover me while I reload. Instead, they're all reacting to the same reality. The system sees where you are, it knows where your cover is. If the orchestrator tells the enemy A to shoot at you, it can tell the enemies B, C and D to surround the player. To us, the player, that can't see this invisible hive mind, it looks like the enemies can think and decided, my ally is providing suppressive fire, therefore I should move to a side angle. To you, the player, it looks like a pincer maneuver executed by a professional squad. But they aren't. They are not even capable of making decisions. It's quite literally a mastermind behind the scenes controlling them like puppets. That's what makes this solution so elegant in my opinion. When the Fear team implemented this solution in the past, it was way ahead of its time. Even now, most games today still have very bad AI in comparison. That's why we as indie devs can make a big impact and use that technique to get a massive advantage in our games in comparison to AAA flop companies. Let's compare 2 approaches to enemy AI, because this is where the difference and also its impact on performance really becomes obvious. First, the naive approach. In this setup, every enemy is basically trying to be smart on its own. Each agent checks what every other agent is doing, then makes its own decision based on that. So you end up with a system where everyone is constantly watching everyone else. That creates a quadratic complexity, also known as O of n squared. As the number of enemies goes up, the number of interactions explode. Not just more enemies more work, but more enemies exponentially more coordination problems. It's similar to the topic in my previous video in this case. And on top of that, it's messy in practice, because each agent is optimizing for itself, not the squad. That leads to conflict of interest. One enemy wants to push, another wants to hold position, another decides to retreat. And the system has to constantly recheck what everyone else is doing just to stay vaguely coherent. Which again has a huge impact on performance. To have a believable reaction time for your enemies, you would have to constantly recheck all of those calculations dozens of times per second. The amount of work it needed quite literally explodes. And even if it works, it often feels unstable or inconsistent under pressure. Now let's compare that to GOAP. In a GOAP-based system, you don't really have a dozen independent decision makers trying to agree on reality. You effectively have one invisible orchestrator, the puppet master, or the hive mind, however you want to call it. A shared system that understands what every agent is doing and what the overall situation looks like. It can also cheat by always knowing where the player is, how much health they have and whatever they are doing, but still act like they don't. That's another layer of illusion to trick the player into thinking that the enemies are actually sensing the world and understanding the situation they're in. Also, instead of each enemy calculating everything from scratch, the system iterates through agents in a controlled way and assigns or builds actions based on shared goals. That gives you a linear complexity. More enemies still means more work, but it scales cleanly. No explosion of cross-checking and no recalculation of everyone else's intentions. And because decisions are controlled through a single system, cohesion comes for free basically. You don't need to simulate communication between agents because the coordination already exists at the system level. This saves you a massive amount of processing power as well. This also means you can run these decision passes less frequently or even trigger them on a specific event, instead of constantly recalculating everything every frame. Still, after all of that, the biggest advantage isn't even performance, it's clarity. We all know the saying, too many cooks spoil the broth. Even taking our own shooter context into consideration. Imagine we send a real-life squad somewhere on a mission. No army in the world would want every soldier to be making up their own tactics and commands to everyone else. That's quite literally the reason we have squad leaders and a chain of command. Because when one system has full awareness of the entire situation, it can make coordinated decisions. This is where the illusion of intelligence really starts to lock in our case. Now let's look back at that reloading shout in the beginning. On a technical level, that's just a voice line triggered by an animation state. But to you, the player, it's information. Maybe an opportunity, maybe a trap. It tells you exactly what the AI is doing so you can react to it. Behind the scenes, it's just the orchestrator telling enemy A to trigger voice line reloading. At the same time, it can tell the other enemies to shoot at the player. To you, it looks like they are shouting their intentions and coordinating. Your brain starts filling in the gaps. That one guy started reloading and his teammates covered him, you think. You start assuming a coordination and you start assuming actual intelligence in the enemy. So what's the takeaway from all of this? If you're making a game, this is the lesson. You don't need to write overly complex algorithms all the time. And the key takeaway I want you to remember is that every system, everything that you want to implement can be broken down into multiple layers. And if you intelligently plan ahead before you start coding and implement those layers in a cohesive way that work together, you will not only end up with a way cleaner project that's scalable, but actually get a system that most of the times works even better than the realistic approach that you would think of at the first instance. That's why it's so important to map out, brainstorm and just take notes about how you want your system to work before you start coding. Then everything else comes naturally. At the end of the day, games aren't reality. We are carefully building illusions with intent and clarity. When systems are designed well, they become simpler, they become more efficient, more elegant, and even more easy to scale later on. That's the real trick professionals use. Not simulating everything realistically, and also not immediately implementing their ideas, but simplifying the right things so the illusion holds up. In my opinion, that's where the true art of game development begins, and also the exact reason why I fell in love with it. Thank you for watching, and if you're interested in different topics in games, feel free to comment and I will try to make a video about it in the future. I try to keep my videos in a general style so everyone can directly benefit from this information, but if you want I can also make hands-on videos where I show you how to directly implement the topics that I talk about.